The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Thank you everyone for joining today's Tech Talk webinar. Today's topic is hybrid JSP headless commerce sites. Just a couple of housekeeping notes before we begin. All attendee lines have been placed on mute for the webcast to ensure quality control. If you have questions or comments during the webcast, please feel free to enter those into the chat module located on the bottom right-hand portion of your web console. Also, today's webinar is being recorded and will have availability to the webcast and to content library under the community tab on the pipelinepros.org site by the end of day on Monday. Again, if you have any questions after the conclusion of today's webcast, please feel free to email those questions to info@pipelinepros.org. At this time, I will turn it over to ULTA's Jesse Emerson.
Hi, thanks Jesse, and welcome everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening if you're in a far off time zone, and thanks for joining. I'm joined today by a couple of colleagues, so let me introduce myself. Jesse Emerson, IT Director for e-commerce at ULTA, joined by Eric Halverson, our Solution Architect, Kavitha Durai, one of our development managers, as well as two of our lead developers, Pushpendra Kardala and Setu Madhavure. So we're going to talk a little bit about our experiences moving our commerce installation from the legacy JSP out-of-box front-end architecture to what I think a lot in the folks in the industry are calling a headless or a web services enabled front-end architecture. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of our learnings in that journey. And I'm going to now turn it over to Eric and Kavitha to share those details with you.
Thank you, Jesse. So, as Jesse mentioned, our goal was to create a single-page experience or a headless architecture with our site redesign efforts for ULTA.com. See if I can get this to work. So our goal was to be able to provide a hybrid experience combining both our traditional JSP-powered web pages in addition to this new single-page or headless architecture experience. The technologies that we chose to develop this single-page experience were React and Redux. We'll actually be speaking in detail about some of our experiences around implementing our front end using React and Redux during the Insight conference in the next 2 weeks or so. So,
Eric, and just dialoguing with you a little bit, the reason why we did this, right, is we could have taken a much longer project cycle time and ported the entire site over, right? But of course, that would have probably been a 12, maybe even 18-month endeavor. And it also would have potentially been a little riskier, right? So part of this is speed to value, bring part of the site on the new platform or the new architecture first, and learn along the way, right? And that's why we have this sort of dual paradigm, right?
Exactly, yeah. So essentially, it allows us to carve out pieces of functionality on the site. So in our case, we started with an adaptive mobile homepage experience and kind of evolved from there. But by limiting the scope, we kind of got our feet wet in the technology. All of these front-end technologies, for the most part, were new to the team, or they're relatively new to the industry. To be honest, React is something it's been out there, but from a retail or e-commerce, there's not a lot of adoption just yet. So we're kind of getting our toes wet and just understanding what does it mean to be or to have a single-page architecture. What does it mean to power those single-page applications with RESTful services? So to your point, that's exactly why we could have went with a 12 to 16-month project, but we chose from an architecture standpoint to say, let's see how we can roll this out in more of a hybrid fashion. So that's essentially what our approach was, to leverage the REST MVC framework that is provided in, I believe it's either 10.2 or Oracle Commerce 11 and beyond to enable the new React JS front end to power certain aspects of the site. As we mentioned before, we started with mobile homepage, and we're currently extending that that architecture beyond just the homepage today. And these services would be deployed alongside of our existing JSPs to provide a seamless experience as the guest is, navigating through our site. So, they're on their iPhone, they hit a React-enabled homepage, click on a product detail page, and then, seamlessly transition to, behind the scenes, what is the JSP, but from their experience has no change in the look or feel or in the way that we're handling that user session. So conceptually, this is what we were trying to do. Essentially, we had multiple entry points, the React application, our traditional ULTA.com web pages, each powering different subsets of the site.
Right. And of course, it's a real nice visual, right? And what we're about to talk about is the session management, right? When we're on JSP versus what we were trying to go to, and some of the fun, maybe in air quotes, that we encountered kind of midway through that journey.
Right. Yep. So conceptually, this is what we thought things would kind of or how they would come to be. The problem is this is actually how.
Yes. Jesse, let me ask you, what was the reason? I think I missed it. What was the reason why you guys decided to do the dual approach versus just going to a full responsive?
So quick recap. So two things. We were responsive prior to this. We've been responsive since late 2013. What we did is we moved off of JSP serving up our front end and to the React JavaScript framework backed by REST Web Services. The reason why we did not migrate the entire site is we wanted to speed up value to our guests and business. What we ultimately did first was we rebuilt our mobile homepage, but we're going to take the stepwise approach throughout the site. And really, it probably would have simplified the solution footprint had we gone all big bang, but it certainly would have increased business risk, and it would have resulted in a much longer cycle time. So if you can imagine, I would have probably had a $2, $3, $4 million cash outlay to move the whole site. I wouldn't have seen value for that for 12 to 18 months. So there was certainly an interest on both the part of the business and IT to realize some value faster, chunk up that spend, and as Eric said a few minutes ago, to get our feet wet with the technologies themselves.
Okay. So, I mean, it was never the intention to stay on this architecture. This is just transition architecture.
That's correct.
Okay. All right. Sorry about that.
Oh, that's fine. Thank you.
Yeah, and just to step back really quick, because I kind of glazed over this, and Justin mentioned, we have been responsive since 2013, and much of that experience is powered by a mixture of jQuery and the Bootstrap CSS framework. So the current architecture, which is JSP driven, is still responsive, leveraging these technologies. So that's why, from a hybrid approach, they actually work pretty well together, because we're still able to provide a mobile-specific experience on both the JSP architecture as well as the new React-based architecture, which allowed for more of that seamless experience from a guest perspective.
That makes sense.
So as I mentioned, conceptually, this is what we were attempting to accomplish. In reality, what things look like within the ATG framework is more like this. And I'm going to dive into the details of the implications of this architecture. So essentially, when you enable the REST services, the MVC REST services in the ATG platform, they're actually deployed as a separate WAR file. And that means that your application container, per the Java Enterprise Edition spec, is going to treat that as a separate application. So session sharing is something that it's kind of, depending on what you read out there, it's never been a great idea. If you look at some of the best practices that Oracle and other Java experts have talked about, but there has always been some limited functionality or supportability out in the marketplace. But with JBoss EAP 6, which is the version of JBoss we're running today, it's explicitly not supported. Nucleus, which is the underlying framework of ATG, can share session data across applications. And the way they do this, I've illustrated in this diagram, is essentially all of the Nucleus components that are shared are deployed in a separate application. This is bound to a context root. If you've seen Dyn referenced either in dashboards or the code base, the Dyn context root is essentially the aggregation point or the central Nucleus component for any applications that are deployed within a single ear file. So one thing I missed on this diagram, but you can think of this entire container as a single ear file deployed within the JBoss container. So as a result of this functionality, it initially masked the issue because on the surface it seems that session data can easily be shared across applications. There's no issue there, right? Well, as we start digging into kind of the specific scenarios, we start seeing inconsistencies and other problems with this. Things around login, logout, session expiration, and the primary cause for this is the fact that the J2E session is actually at the application level. So as it's deployed within the application server container, each application is going to have its own session store, if you will. And this is where the data is not shared. So that's where, not only from a session management perspective, but also if either in the out-of-box logic or in your custom code, you've leveraged the J2E session for either state management or other data sharing, this breaks because now these two applications, your RESTful services and your JSPs, no longer have visibility to the same session context. There's also a memory implication to this as well, because now every single request from a mobile user, or rather every single session from a mobile user, is now going to double the number of sessions that you have within your application server. So as this user or as this guest is navigating to the site and hitting both our React-based web pages and our JSP-based web pages, they now have sessions across both of these applications, which essentially doubles the footprint, which is another implication to be aware of in this scenario. So I'd like to open it up to my team just to kind of add anything else or any questions from you, Jesse, on the phone.
Yeah, do we have anything out from the audience on the approach taken or any technical questions?
The one question we've received is what version of ATG are you guys currently on?
Sorry, I should have mentioned that up front. We are currently on Oracle Commerce 11.2.
Yeah, we've had experience with the REST services for, I believe it's going on 3, maybe 4 years now. When they first shipped out of the box, we were utilizing them to power our native apps. So we have a few years of experience with those services under our belt. We've actually also started to customize those a bit more for our specific needs. A good question.
Yep. Yeah, we started with the legacy, or what's referred to now as the legacy ATG REST services. And those were the original services powering the mobile native applications. We've since migrated that to the REST MVC platform, and that's the framework that we built the web services to support the ULTA.com React application as well.
Kavitha, anything you want to add or touch on or just highlight or reinforce that Eric went through?
I mean, just one, it is implicit, like the session expiration. What we faced is that the timeout configurations were different. We had 15 minutes for our the ULTA application, but implicitly JBoss had a 30 minutes. So even though it looks like timed out, but the session still persisted for a longer period of time. So under load, we experienced performance issues related to that as well. And then when we added our mobile app also is on the same framework, but we added they have an additional module, mobile store on top of these two, and that kind of tripled the sessions that are being maintained on our infrastructure.
Yeah, so I think the key there is as soon as you're dealing with multiple applications, there's several implications of that, both from a runtime, with memory management and session storage, but also as configuration, as Kavitha mentioned, where in our specific case we had different timeouts because we had an explicit timeout in our ULTA application, but because we didn't have an explicit one in the other one, it was defaulting to, in our case, the JBoss default time of 30 minutes, which kind of further increased the heap utilization in our scenario.
Yeah, so I would like to add another thing here is, so even though we have a kind of a robust performance test cycle, one thing which we did not do, and that's basically a learning experience, another learning experience for us, is that we were probably not aware of the recent trends in the traffic and how much we get hit from the mobile browsers. And also, as a part of the regression cycles that we do from release to release, we didn't have any soak tests or extended duration tests included in the cycle. So this problem, what we experience in production, it gets accumulated over a period of time. So only after 4 or 5 hours, 6 hours under a constant load, when you actually start to experience this issue. So anybody going with this hybrid kind of architecture with partially JSP and partially REST, highly recommended. Put your application code under extended duration test in your testing environment. Capture the heap dumps, take the memory dumps, and just make sure that it's not the HTTP session which is basically eating into your memory. So just another learning experience for us.
That's great. And that was Rohit Mishra, who also joined us here from ULTA, another one of our solution architects in DevOps, and also a strong performance background. So I'll just summarize what Eric, Kavitha, and Rohit said. So we ran into this performance problem, which was the convergence of going from one session on ULTA.com to two, that newly introduced session, or our services defaulting to a 30-minute timeout from 15. And also, as Rohit said, the traffic profile for ULTA, much as like for many of you probably, has skewed very much to our native apps over the years. That we're seeing a real acceleration in that. And so the combination of those three things, as Eric said, really changed the profile of heap utilization and caused what was an appropriately spec'd infrastructure prior to earlier this year to be certainly underpowered, and also the convergence of the code that we put in and the code that was already existing meant that we were not being efficient with that memory. So I think now we're going to talk a little bit about what we did, right?
Yep. Yeah, great. Thanks, Jesse. So, essentially, or actually, just really quick, I want to call out, and this, I believe we'll send out this this deck after, but there are two links that I've included here just to kind of go into a little more detail around the specific session sharing issue, or not issue, but lack of supportability within JBoss EAP 6.4, which is available on redhat.com, and as well as the documentation on session sharing across Nucleus applications within the ATG framework. So both of these links are available. one thing to call out is the lack of session sharing is specific to our application server and our application server version. Your mileage may vary depending on if you're using JBoss or WebLogic or any other supported web server, or sorry, application server. So, just be aware that this is specific to JBoss, might be a little different depending on if you're using WebLogic or WebSphere. So essentially the solution was, well, let's just combine these as a single application. We considered a couple other options. One was around, well, can we put something in front of it, like a orchestration layer, either its own independent service, maybe with its own infrastructure, kind of like an API gateway, if you will, that can orchestrate certain events to manage the sessions across these two applications. Another way that we thought of doing it, well, instead of having that orchestration layer, let's just build that logic into the individual applications, and using the session sharing capability of Nucleus, invoke triggers as events or as requests come in from one application to the other to do things like invalidate sessions or issue logins, logouts across the entire application stack. Both of those solutions were overly complicated, and they didn't really resolve the underlying issue that we saw from a performance standpoint around duplication of session data. So, as we kind of thought through these solutions, really the best solution that we came up with was to just combine these as a single application that can be deployed as a single WAR, and essentially the session sharing issue goes away. It's no longer a problem because now everything is contained within the same application and can be managed as such. So just to kind of jump into some of the details, I'm not going to read this line for line, but the details will be available after the webinar. Essentially, what we needed to do was modify our web XML to include the REST proxy servlet with it. If you go into the ATG documentation, you can get a little more on kind of how this works, how the existing not Bootstrap, but the ATG REST WAR is deployed, and the head servlet that's leveraged there. But ultimately, this REST proxy servlet is the entry point for the REST MVC request through the application server. So we just took that mapping and added it to our base web XML for the ULTA WAR file that was hosting our JSPs as well. Now, there was some additional customization that we needed to do to actually facilitate the functionality. This doesn't work out of box. This is probably beyond what we would consider a supported customization. But this is the efforts that we did to essentially allow for the existing out-of-box framework to work under the context of a single application. So within the head REST servlet, we made a couple of configurations to essentially parse the incoming request and strip off our context root from the base JSP WAR file. So essentially, ATG MVC REST assumes that all context roots are /REST, and there seems to be some internal logic that relies on that to do the mapping when you get into like the actor configuration and all that. So one of the customizations we did was essentially for any of the requests that are bound for the REST MVC framework, essentially strip off our context root. In our case, everything is /ULTA. So, simple string comparison, regex, we chop that off and then forward it on to the REST proxy servlet. And then that kind of, overcame the assumption within the ATG framework that everything was going to be based off of the REST context root. One other call out here is one of the earlier customizations we did actually bypass the ATG page filter, and that actually exposed a memory leak. So there appears to be some kind of session or either session request object handling within page filter. So by bypassing the page filter, you actually open yourself up to even more memory issues than having multiple sessions across multiple applications. So, if you are looking at customizing, this in a similar way, just be aware that all requests do need to go through a page filter to be handled by the ATG platform appropriately. So just quickly to kind of recap the lessons learned, be aware that the ATG REST MVC framework is deployed by default as a separate application, and the implications of this, as we've discussed. If you choose to go with a similar hybrid approach as we did, be ready to customize Oracle Commerce. And as I mentioned earlier, your mileage may vary depending on the application server and version that you're using. So, this is very specific to our environment. It may or may not be the same depending on your application server as well as ATG version. One other thing I wanted to call out, consider upgrading to 11.3, especially if you're in the 11.x already. The reason why is, if you're not aware, 11.3 ships with a new REST framework, and this REST framework is based off of the REST framework that's provided in the Oracle Commerce Cloud offering. And the primary benefit to this is it aligns to a lot of the modern best practices in REST service development today. So it's built around JAX-RS, which is the Java Enterprise Edition standard. It already has a inbuilt capability to integrate with your existing REST MVC implementation. So if if you've already built some services or have already maybe built services to support a mobile application and you're looking to extend those for your website as well, you could still do that, leverage those existing REST MVC implementations, but have the entry point come through this new REST layer provided with 11.3. It's all annotation driven, which makes all the services that you define, all the endpoints you define as auto-discoverable when you deploy in a runtime that supports it. So that means no customizing your web XML, no customizing some of the properties around what entry points are bound to what services and all that. It makes things a lot easier from a developer perspective. It supports, and I always mispronounce this, Headless out of box, and I lost my note on, let me bring that up really quick. Headless stands for Hypermedia as the Engine of Application State. Really what this means is it's a way to develop self-describing APIs. So in line with your API response, you can actually make links or references to other resources or other operations on your resources. So from a best practice standpoint, it allows for clients to easily consume your REST services because you provide all the data that you need as part of the response. I included a link to the Wikipedia page on Headless. Feel free to check it out to learn more, but it's quickly becoming an expectation in REST services as a best practice going forward. And one other thing to call out is there is a statelessness option or support within this framework. I personally do not have a lot of experience with this. I've read about the capabilities, and it's definitely something interesting to explore if you're going down this route. Essentially, it forces or it shifts all of the stateful session data to your client, and that data is exchanged either through the body parameters or the header response, depending on the payload, back and forth between your client and server. So, in a large part, this could mitigate any kind of session issues that you might have by offloading that on your client. It might also increase your complexity on your client as well. So be aware of that, be aware that's available, and may or may not be worthwhile to consider.
One thing One thing with that, though, is also be aware that it's an all or none setting. Your ATG is either going to run sessionless or session full. You can't have, if you have multi-site scenarios, you can't migrate them one at a time. So keep that in mind. They all have to be switched to be sessionless, and there's not an in-between today.
Yep. Yeah, that's a great call out.
Is that Chad Taylor with TBC?
It is.
All right. Thanks, Chad, for another one of our Oracle Commerce customers and user group members with quite a bit of experience in the space. Thanks for that. Eric, did you have more to say?
Yeah, just a couple other things. Alternatively, look at maybe if it makes sense for you to do this as a big bang. So, for ULTA, it made sense for us to go with this hybrid approach, and we had some challenges along the way to support that, but ultimately, we believe this was the best approach from both an IT perspective as well as a business perspective. However, your priorities or your scenarios might be different. So, consider going with the big bang approach where essentially you can just decommission JSPs altogether and rely on REST services throughout your site experience. One other thing I want to call out, not really related to session management or session sharing, but something to consider as you're going down this path is think about server-side rendering and the SEO implications of doing a single-page architecture up front, and bake that into kind of your development effort. We're kind of going through this now to understand the implications of, well, all right, how are we going to support this, going forward as we expand the single-page or the React-based architecture across the site, especially on pages that are heavily indexed. So when we get into product listing pages and product detail pages, what do we need to do to support the web crawlers and search engines out there? So just be aware of that up front. It'll save you a little bit of rework as you get into some of the details of the development of your React applications or any JavaScript framework that you choose.
Yeah, what I'd like to do now, we had originally planned this out with ULTA in mind, and over the last couple of weeks, I think it was coming off of an Oracle Commerce Advisory Board meeting webinar a few weeks back. It dawned on me that we could extend this out to an hour, but as you saw just now, it fit pretty neatly inside 30 minutes. So Eric, fantastic job. Rather than going straight to questions, which we will get to, I'd like to bring in a couple of other customers, members on the user group who volunteered to join us in this call and just share a little bit of experiences that they've had in the same space, maybe give the wider audience a little bit more to chew on and really foster a dialogue. So a couple of folks have already jumped in as we've been talking, as Eric's been talking. I highly encourage that. So certainly do not be shy about interjecting, but I do want to bring into the discussion Vijay Srinivasan with AutoZone, and right after Vijay, I'd like to bring in Craig Oley with Eaton, who are the two folks that agreed to share some of their experiences. So Vijay, if I could cut over to you, introduce yourself briefly, and then give us a little flavor for what's been going on in AutoZone.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jesse. Hey guys, this is Vijay Srinivasan. I'm the director for e-commerce. I've been with the company with AutoZone for about 14 and a half years, been in e-commerce for close to 10 years now. I am probably the least technical person on the call, Jesse. So most of the conversation that we had here, I've heard my tech team talk extensively. I also have Power C. Wright and Chris Lith. Chris Lith is one of our architects, and Power C. Wright is one of our development managers on the call. They probably can share more details on what's going on from a technology standpoint. But as an overview, before I turn it over to those guys, we AutoZone, we have both B2C and B2B operations, and we have been running on ATG for about 8.5, 9 years now. Both our websites are running on ATG. We use Indica. We use pretty much all the products in the commerce suite of ATG on both B2C and B2B platforms. We also have a mobile website, and we also have mobile apps. And the way we are operating today is that, especially on the retail side, we have two distinct code bases, one for desktop and one for mobile. And this fiscal year, this fiscal year starting September, we are going to start our mobile-first re-architecture, redesign initiative. We are planning to migrate to 11.3 ATG as part of the mobile-first initiative. And some of the conversations that we had, especially from a headless architecture perspective, is going to be extremely critical for us because I think it's going to help us accelerate some of our initiatives. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Power and Chris to share any of their thoughts.
Great. Power, Chris, are you on? We can't hear you. Are you there?
That's strange. They are not in the same room with me.
Chris, you should.
Why don't we do this? Okay, great.
Okay. Hi, this is Chris Light. Can you guys hear me?
We can.
Okay, so yeah, so that the lessons learned slide had a really good overview for some highlights in our plan. So we're planning to move to 11.3 to leverage a lot of those new capabilities. We're also looking to get some Open API Swagger specs published into an API gateway that we're launching as part of that work as well. So we haven't started the real define. Right now we have just an approach and a direction, which includes the upgrade from 3 and React and going headless with the whole back end. We plan to solve some of the session sharing in Redis and Cassandra with our API gateway instead of in ATG. But again, we haven't really got into the low-level details of that yet or began to execute that work. So I'm looking forward to getting connected with some people in the community, particularly about 11.3 and their experiences.
Yeah, that's excellent. You know, as Eric said a little earlier on, certainly a layer of orchestration was an option. We are not in the as far along probably as you all are, and we have sequenced an API gateway differently, but that certainly makes a lot of sense. We're now ourselves looking at API gateways from an enterprise standpoint. Obviously, would have bearing here. That's very helpful. Anything else to add from your end?
Power, did you have anything? Did he get turned on for the mic?
He should be able to speak.
Oh, now I think I'm unmuted. Can you hear me, guys?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I would just add that, you know, I've been with AutoZone for about 8 months, and so my first project was basically the full stack upgrade. So we're upgrading, you know, Oracle database, JBoss web servers, basically the entire stack, and we're, you know, many months into that process. I think we're still about maybe 8 to 10 weeks away from launching, and we will, you know, achieve 11.2 upgrade, and then I think quickly on the heels of that, we will attempt to move on to 11.3. So it's been, you know, a challenge for us for sure. You know, a lot of the configuration management, layer configuration continues to be something that we're diligently working through, but I think we're near the end of that work, and now we're just kind of transitioning into kind of synchronizing our code that has been kind of moving along with our frequent releases, and when we finish the synchronization of the code and our performance testing, we'll be ready to launch.
Outstanding. Now, what I'd like to do is, go ahead, is there somebody chiming in? Okay, now what I'd like to do then is cut it over to Craig Oley with Eaton. If Craig, you could introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what's going on in the commerce world at Eaton.
Sure. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
All right. This is Craig Oley. I'm the technical program manager with Eaton. We are right now mainly a B2B manufacturer. We have a pretty large site, and it's definitely expanding very quickly. So where we are in the process of this transition, we are working on the 11.3 upgrade now. We currently still have the monolithic JSP, jQuery stuff, very similar to ULTA, where you guys said a lot of your legacy stuff is, or a lot of your older version stuff is. We're also in the transition to unifying all of our code base onto Bootstrap for mobility. So we kind of have two big initiatives going on there, where we're going to be making everything unified under one code base to be mobile responsive with Bootstrap. Probably doing that in a similar approach to the hybrid approach you guys took with Headless, and then following that up with moving to the Headless architecture on 11.3 using React.js as well. We plan on doing both of those in the hybrid approach, step by step, with the pages that will add the most value first and things like that.
Outstanding. Are you running JBoss, WebLogic, or are you running a different application server?
We're WebLogic.
Okay, great. So
on the Commerce Cloud,
so we had a question from the ULTA side. Just wanted to know, Eden, are you on-prem or are you Commerce Cloud?
We're on-prem. We've done a lot of analysis with Commerce Cloud to do kind of like microsite spin-ups and things like that for product launches, but right now we are fully on-prem, but like I said, evaluating.
Got it. Yeah, and a good point of clarification for everybody. We, ULTA, are certainly on-prem, as is AutoZone. Now I'd like to just open it up to the floor. I think we've got quite a few folks out there in the audience. Any other comments or experiences that folks are having with session management? Anybody else want to chime in?
There's been a couple of questions about Endeca, and if you're using Endeca and how you're using it with this process.
Yeah, I'll start that, and then I'll turn to Eric and Kavita and some of the other folks in the room.
Specific to search or XM?
Yep, we are using Endeca for both. We implemented Endeca guided search in 2013, along with the site redesign that also took us responsive. That was a migration not off of ATG search, but rather a third party. And so we went from that third party to Endeca guided search. At that time, we did not implement Experience Manager. We had our hands full with the scope as it had been spec'd out in prior year planning. We also, frankly, did not quite understand the space and the purpose for Endeca. I don't fault Oracle for that. We just we hadn't given a lot of time and thought to it. They certainly did bring Experience Manager to our attention. We said, thanks, but no thanks, we'll pass. We then, the following year, realized that there would be advantage in deploying Experience Manager, and we do deploy it today. So I'll again let Eric and Kavita chime in on more of the specifics.
So we leverage Endeca, and it is deployed as part of the ATG application as well. So the request to Endeca, we have customized the assembler tool class and exposed it as a service on the REST layer. We are looking at decoupling ATG and Endeca and deploying that as a service on its own, but currently it's deployed within ATG.
Yep. Yeah, I think just to get into the details a little more, so it's kind of a two-step process. So right now the mobile homepage content is powered by XM. So if you go out to ULTA.com on a mobile device, you'll see the homepage, and that's all XM driven. And the way we've done it is exactly like how Kavitha said. So it's all integrated with an ATG, and it's kind of a two-step process. So the first process involves some customizations around assembler tools and invoking the Endeca response and getting it in JSON format. And then what we do is we take that response from Endeca and we go through an enrichment process with an ATG. So anything that either we chose not to index or it's not timely enough to index within Endeca, we essentially enrich that that content within ATG, and then that becomes the response, the enriched response that gets sent back as part of that service call.
Does that answer the question?
I believe so. The next question was, for anyone who has migrated from 11.2 to 11.3, how significant was the project?
Anybody on the phone on 11.3 now and can speak to that? ULTA is not. We're on 11.2.
TDC is in the process of that, but we're only halfway, so I wouldn't be able to give a good answer, but in about 3 months I can.
Now, one of the things I do know from Oracle is that although it is titled as a dot release, it is more significant than some of the other dot releases. And unfortunately, I can't give specifics there, but we did get a little bit of a caution from Oracle just to set expectation properly and you know, make sure that you may not be like, you know, we've probably done 5 upgrades since I've been with ULTA. Certainly done, I think now 3, if not 4 major rev upgrades. Definitely a difference between major and a dot. This was probably falling somewhere in the middle.
Hey Jesse, this is Gary Kirshner from Oracle. Honestly, the upgrade should probably, you know, from the application perspective, should not be terribly complex. There are not major architectural changes other than
okay,
that,
great.
the new
Great.
search string. What has happened though is we have potentially dropped some old versions of supporting applications, so that may make it more complex, and we're not releasing it as a patch release. It's only a full install. So from that perspective, it's more complex. From the application, it should not be significant.
Got it. Great. Thanks so much, Gary.
Sure.
Other questions or comments? Anybody else out there in the services journey as far as porting over to services to power your site? Experiences with JavaScript? Anything anybody else wants to dialogue on?
Yeah. Hi. This is Abhinav Ranjan from New York and Company. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can, Abhinav. How are you?
So good. I mean, just to add to this conversation of upgrading from 11.2 to 11.3, we are looking at it. I mean, we haven't planned yet, like when we want to really launch it, but we did conduct a POC and did an upgrade in our non-production environment to see how it is impacting our application. I mean, we run our full mobile app of a SaaS platform, and that is powered, the commerce portion of the mobile app is powered through 11.2 REST MVC API today. So it is a significant change if you are today using REST MVC. In 11.3, we get the JAX REST API, the stateless protocol. We did run into some complexities while converting the services and all. So it's not like you can port over the already built REST MVC services into the 11.3. So we'll have to basically translate them to the stateless behavior we are getting with 11.3 out of box. I mean, it is very useful and exciting that it has come through in 11.3. It will be very helpful when we are also in the process thinking about React.js, whether we should take a full-blown approach or we should go the hybrid way. It sounds like the community agrees that going through with phased approach is better, and that is where we are leaning towards after doing all our POCs and looking into the details of 11.3 migration, as well as like porting over our REST services, which are powering our mobile app today. So just a little bit of insight there. And as Gary Kushner just mentioned, the application-wise, the migration is not significant. We did run into a few issues which were not that complex to resolve. And it's pretty easy. It is nothing like upgrading from a 10.x version to 11.x version, so which we did last year. So I mean, if anybody in the community wants any insight into migration into 11.2 from a 10x version or these details, feel free to reach out to me. We can discuss.
Okay, fantastic. Anybody else?
And just one more question before I hand over. So people who are running the mobile app on top of 11.2 Commerce API, can somebody provide a quick insight into how it is performing, how things are in the architecture in terms of infrastructure usability and the tools which ATG provide, or is it like we have to build the mobile app? I mean, we are thinking in that direction currently, moving away from the SaaS platform we are using today and building a in-house fully native iOS and Android app. So any insight there would be very helpful to us.
For native app, and you said native app on 11.2?
Yeah, 11.2 is where we are, but we'll be building our app on 11.3 because we are going to upgrade. It's just a matter of time to figure out when we want to release that.
Yeah, I think, from our case, we don't have anyone from our mobility team in the room, but I'll speak a little bit to it. So as far as a code base standpoint, my understanding is both our Android and iPhone apps are completely custom. So if there is a quick start application, I believe there's an assisted selling app that ships with the commerce platform that might have some of that, inbuilt logic for iPhones or any kind of iOS device. We're not leveraging any of that today. So it is all custom and built. The one thing that I will say is, I think it's definitely a good thing to go with 11.3 because your mobile developers are definitely going to enjoy writing against the REST services that are provided as part of 11.3 more so than REST MVC. It's just, it aligns to kind of the industry standards of today. So you get a new mobile developer that may have never seen ATG before, but they're coding against the 11.3 services. I think you'd have a much better experience in that scenario.
Yep. We're really looking forward to that. Great, thank you.
So we're close to time. I'm going to wrap it up. I really appreciate everyone who attended today. I want to thank Eric, Kavitha, and Rohit for taking us through this topic, as well as Vijay, the AutoZone team, Craig and the Eden team, and certainly everyone who participated in the dialogue with questions and comments. Our team will be at the Insight North America conference in just over a week outside of the city of Chicago here in Rosemont. So if you will be attending, really would look forward to meeting in person, and if your teams are going to be on the ground, there will be plenty of opportunity to dialogue on details and also talk about other topics. So really looking forward to that. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Jesse Howard with Pipeline Pros to final closeout.
We want to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. Be on the lookout for information about how to access the recording for today's webinar under the Community tab on the pipelinepros.org website. Also, be on the lookout for additional webinars to be announced over the next few weeks as we look into Life After Insight North America, which takes place starting week after next, 1 week from Monday. The time to register is still available. You can register through Thursday of next week online. After that, on-site registration will be the only way to register for the conference. This does conclude today's webcast. We want to thank all of our presenters for taking part and taking time out of their day to participate. Thank you, everyone, and have a great afternoon.